peace, standing on our feet, not kneeling on our knees.
We know him as the peacemaker, the president of a new South Africa. Frontline tells the intimate and surprising story of a Mandela few people know, a bomb-throwing revolutionary who became a skilled politician in prison, a passionate man who sacrificed the love of his life for a country that needed him more. This is the story of a remarkable man of history who united a nation and inspired the world. The Long Walk of Nelson Mandela, tonight on Frontline. February 11th, 1990. The eyes of the world fixed on a prison near Cape Town.
No word as yet. No word as yet of Mr. Mandela.
It was a name that resonated in every corner of the planet.
We're waiting for the release of Mr. Mandela.
But the man behind the name remained a mystery.
Any moment now, any moment.
Who had he become in the long years away? And could he live up to all the expectations? The last step on his walk to freedom had begun. The last time the world had seen him was 3 decades earlier on his way to court.
Charged on 2 counts of sabotage, 1 of contravening the suppression.
The penalty for sabotage was hanging. In his cell, Mandela labored at a speech that he would deliver from the dock.
My Lord, I am the first accused.
It amounted to his political will and testament.
I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony.
He grew up in the royal crawl of the Madiba clan. He had the privilege of a good education at mission school and then at college. Mandela arrived in Johannesburg in 1941 with nothing but his suit and his aristocratic demeanor.
He was different. Mandela's clothes always looked as if they had been specially picked to fit him exactly.
In the city, he met a man who would shape his destiny. His name was Walter Sisulu.
I was also active in politics. And when a young man, person of Nelson's nature, came, it was a godsend to me.
Mandela was living in a segregated township. He studied law by candlelight. Merging with the voteless masses, he faced the daily indignities of black urban life.
The humiliation, the anonymity, the jungle of Johannesburg, as it was then. I think that was more of a shock probably than Mandela's ever quite been able to describe. The city life made him feel that he was part of a much larger society who were suffering in a way that he hadn't properly comprehended or hadn't felt before he came to Johannesburg. So I think it was a combination of the personal humiliations, which were almost visible every day, together with the awareness of being part of this bigger scene.
Mandela was in fact emerging as a leader in his own right. The African population especially hated the pass laws. They controlled their movements and kept them out of white areas. Failure to carry the pass books risked arrest and imprisonment. The ANC rose up against the system that came to be known as apartheid.
In Johannesburg, there was staged last weekend the first move in a campaign that may lead to civil disobedience. Thousands of colored people went to attend a protest meeting called by the African National Congress. This campaign would urge all colored people to break the unjust laws and to court arrest.
Smiling for the cameras, Mandela deliberately invited arrest when he burnt his passbook, the image designed to inspire by example. In the township of Sharpeville, a protest against pass laws sparked a ferocious response.
Police mounted on tanks opened fire. 69 natives were killed, 176 wounded. Most of the victims were shot in the back. Some of the dead were children, women.
The government proclaimed a state of emergency and declared the ANC illegal. A new era of repression had begun. Mandela evaded arrest. Walled inside the apartment, Mandela was straining to stay loyal to the ANC principle of nonviolence.
Is there any likelihood of violence?
There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and nonviolence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks on an unarmed and defenseless people. And I think the time has come for us to consider, in the light of our experiences, whether the methods which we have applied so far are adequate.
The targets were identified. Installations initially, not people. Mandela and the High Command mapped out a sabotage campaign. The date for the first attacks was December 16th, 1961. The bombs rattled the white government. Among blacks, Mandela's legend grew. To the police, he was South Africa's most wanted man. The police were waiting for him. The state lacked evidence to link him to sabotage. The charges were leaving the country illegally and inciting strikes. At the trial, he would respond by turning the law court into a political stage.
He went with this speech, "I'm a black man in a white man's court." It electrified the nation.
Mandela and the others faced death by hanging.
My Lord, I am the first accused.
In his cell, Mandela drafted a speech whose words would ring around the world. Less a defense than a manifesto, he strove to end his performance not with a plea, but with a challenge.
I have cherished the ideal for a free and democratic society. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.
The court delivered its judgment.
I am by no means convinced that the motives of the accused were as altruistic as they wish the court to believe. The sentence in the case of all the accused will be one of life imprisonment.
I shall never lose hope, and my people shall never lose hope. In fact, we expect that the work will go on.
The prisoners set off on a long journey. Robben Island was the prison where South Africa banished its most dangerous criminals. The new political prisoners were put to hard labor in a quarry.
I remember when I first went to Robben Island, and I'd been working with him for some months, and he's a big man in every way. And when one of the warders took me to his cell and opened the door, I gasped when I saw it. It wasn't room for a human being, much less Nelson Mandela, this outsized human being. And in a strange way, that cell modeled him. His world became constricted, and in a way that allowed him to become bigger because it gave him self-control.
Prison disciplined his militancy, compelling him to devise new strategies for engaging with the enemy.
It was really a war of nerves between the warders and ourselves.
Mandela's method was to challenge the warders on each and every personal indignity.
I used to drive them to the quarry. I was ordered to give them a rough ride so they wouldn't be too comfortable at the back. One day he knocked on my window and demanded, "What the hell do you think we are, a bag of corn?"
Nelson got so fed up with Warder that he actually got up and said, "Look, you don't dare talk to us like that."
Step by measured step, he was imposing his will on his captors.
There were 8 warders with him. Prisoners usually do not set the pace at which they move with their warders. But it was quite obvious that he was.
One of the things that Robben Island taught him is that if he maintained his dignity, if he insisted on being treated the way a man should be treated, then he could bend the authorities on Robben Island to his will. These are the most unrepentant racists in the world, and if they can treat me with dignity and be taught to treat me with dignity, as he did teach them, then he realized he could do it in the wider world.
12 years had passed since Mandela had been banished to the island. Throughout South Africa, his words, even his image, were banned. To a young generation growing up in Soweto, he was more myth than man. It was the children of Soweto who were to resurrect the cause. Not far from Mandela's house, high school students gathered to protest their inferior education. It was the start of the rebellion of 1976. Hundreds died. Thousands fled the country. The young leaders were arrested and thrown into prison. But Mandela's approach had yielded results. Hard labor had gone. Prisoners could now study. For years he had mailed complaints to government and parliament. Eventually, Jimmy Kruger, the Minister of Prisons, responded. Winning over the young rebels was the new test of Mandela's leadership.
There were prisoners who constantly got into an altercation with the prison warders and were punished. Mandela understood and never said that's a wrong reaction. What he did begin to say was, you are not controlling that response.
Mandela's point really was, look, you're going to kill yourselves. These people are going to punish you until you collapse, and then you won't have gained anything from imprisonment, whereas we can actually gain something from this.
Outside, the clampdown continued. Since Mandela's imprisonment, Winnie, left alone with 2 young children, had been beaten, imprisoned, held in solitary confinement, and put under house arrest. In 1977, she was banished with her younger daughter Zinzi to a remote country town far from her Soweto home.
She reawakened dramatically the name of Mandela, and she spoke in his name.
There will be a one man, one vote in this country, and there will be a majority government in this country. But that majority government will accommodate everybody.
Led by
Mandela.
In the 80s, people were on the march again. The spirit of resistance caught fire. The youth heeded a call from the exiled ANC to make the townships ungovernable. Breaking free from Bradford, Winnie emerged as a leader in her own right.
We are standing here firm as a nation of white people, prepared to cooperate.
President Botha responded with brute force, dismissing any other option.
I am not considering even to discuss the possibility of black majority government in South Africa.
Botha declared a state of emergency. He gave the security forces virtually unlimited powers to crush the revolt. The army, police, and intelligence ran the country through a state security council.
There was a lot of difference within the South African bureaucracy, so to speak. We took the view that a political settlement is the only answer to the problems of this country.
A secret document of the Security Council records a meeting where a proposal was discussed to release Mandela. Pressure was mounting to free the prisoner who had become the symbol of liberation.
Violence and destruction throughout the country.
Botha offered to release him, but only on the government's terms.
If Mr. Mandela gives a commitment that he will not make himself guilty of planning, instigating or committing acts of violence for the furtherance of political objectives, I will in principle be prepared to consider his release.
My father says, let him renounce violence. Yes. Let him say that he will dismantle apartheid.
Through his daughter Zinzi, Mandela issued his first public statement in 21 years.
My father says, your freedom and mine cannot be separated. I will return. Amanda!
Alone, Mandela took a historic decision. He wrote to Coetzee proposing talks. Outside, the violence that Mandela had once encouraged was leading the country to the precipice. For a year he waited. Then one night, he was dressed in a suit and taken to the minister's home.
So there they were, sort of sparring with each other, each trying to draw the other across to their point of view. He hoped that he could engage them into serious negotiations about unbanning the ANC and releasing prisoners and that kind of thing. So it was very much a case of, you know, who was the fish and who was the angler in this.
For the next year, alone, he continued to meet secretly with Coetzee. Mandela the prisoner was persuading the government to recognize his status as a leader.
There was a concern that in his isolation he may be manipulated. If there was any manipulation, it was the other way around.
In July 1988, Mandela turned 70. With the ANC's blessing, concerts and demonstrations were held in celebration around the world. Mandela had become the defining image of the liberation struggle. They moved him to a house in the grounds of Victor Verster prison. Guards from Robben Island were assigned to watch over him. Every sound in the house was recorded by 4 government intelligence agencies. Even the trees were bugged.
I'd asked Mandela what was his thinking before his first meeting with P.W. Botha. And he then said to me, the one thing he knew that he was never going to allow was the way P.W. Botha had treated other African leaders, where he had lectured them. He was never going to be allowed to treat me like that.
How are you? How are you? There was almost relief on both sides.
He spoke of P.W. Botha with such veneration, such affection. Why? Because the day that he met P.W. walked halfway across the room with his hand out to shake hands. P.W. had acted like a gentleman and had treated him like a gentleman.
Mandela had been the first to offer peace talks, but it was Botha's government that made the first major concession. Within 3 months of the meeting, Walter Sisulu and the rest of the Rivonia prisoners would be released.
Mandela decided to go and say to the enemy, here's a white flag. I know you are afraid, but raise the flag. He blinked on behalf of the enemy and therefore gave the enemy the chance to retreat.
Botha fell ill and resigned. But his meeting with Mandela had raised new expectations. His successor, F.W. de Klerk, arrived at the presidency, a politician born and bred in the conservative wing of the National Party. He was under irresistible pressure at home and abroad to act quickly.
The government has taken a firm decision to release Mr. Mandela unconditionally. I am serious about bringing this matter to finality without delay.
There's Mr. Mandela, Mr. Nelson Mandela, a free man taking his first steps into a new South Africa. That is the man who the world has been waiting to see.
In Cape Town, a vast crowd waited all day for Mandela's first speech. The government was anxious.
Mandela had become such a magical name that the day he was released, everything would be all right. It would all come right. And we knew it wasn't going to get fixed in a day.
I stand here before you not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people.
The next day, Mandela returned to the home in Soweto he had left 3 decades earlier. Mandela had begun his relationship with de Klerk in a spirit of trust. Their mission was to hammer out a new political order and to carry with them a country brutalized by apartheid, threatened by violence. Mandela described de Klerk as a man of integrity. The violence had escalated dramatically since Mandela's release. The bodies were piling up. Mandela asked to be taken to the scenes of the carnage.
It was a terrible sight.
1993, the white right struck a blow that threatened all-out racial war. They assassinated Chris Hani, a hugely popular ANC leader.
This is a watershed moment for all of us. Our decisions and actions will determine whether we use our pain, our grief, and our outrage to move forward to what is the only lasting solution for our country, an elected government of the people.
The election took place on the 1-year anniversary of Hani's death. Mandela arrived for his presidential inauguration after a landslide victory. De Klerk would be his deputy president in a government of national unity.
I, Nelson Mandela, do hereby swear to be faithful to the Republic of South Africa and to devote myself to the well-being of the Republic and all its people.
Will you please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God"?
So help me God.
One great challenge remained. Mandela now led a racially mixed coalition government. But could he create a common nationhood among a people still deeply divided between black and white?
President Mandela was not a hands-on president at any time. Right from the beginning, he did not interfere in the day-to-day discussions and decisions which were taken. He acted more the role of a ceremonial president, a nation builder, trying to be a unifying factor.
Because you are older than I am.
Yes, I know.
One of his first acts was to invite Mrs. P.W. Botha and the widows of the other old apartheid leaders to lunch.
called me to his house and he said, we must get these women together with some of our women. And I said, what are we going to say to them?
You dodged that day and you wasn't there.
My reaction was also a bit of horror. But I thought, well, it's reconciliation. I mean, you know, this is it.
There's a lady here who was the first to encourage me in my new position, and that is Mrs. Dedrick.
Ons is so dankbaar om so by mekaar te wees. Ons voel almal een. En dankie vir jou.
Baie dankie. Baie dankie. Baie mooi. Thank you.
It's not theatre, it's not symbolic. It is this view that people have got to see this new South Africa as something in which they have a place. That we don't allow whatever gains we've got to be washed away.
Mandela was deliberately constructing himself as the embodiment of an ideal he wanted all South Africans to follow.
This is a practical way of forgetting the past and of building our country.
It's a nation-building strategy, strategy of reconciliation, and so on. And he was prepared to go the whole hog, even when others would have felt awkward and embarrassed even.
Some of the things bamboozle you. Earth.
Whose husbands have brought honor to our country.
We as Tembus have no grudge against wrongdoers. If we cross each other's road today, tomorrow, that's long past and forgotten. That is a good symbol of a good leader. Because if you are a leader, all people are your subjects. You have to listen to them. You have to pay homage to them when the occasion arises.
An occasion. The Rugby World Cup final in Johannesburg. The passion stirred by rugby had always sharpened the divisions between the two nations, black and white.
How was rugby perceived by black people? Maybe a game played by the white oppressors, a game that was used by the governing party and the government of the time as highlighting how good we were as a country. I was walking out the change room, walking into this bright, harsh sunlight, 70,000 South African rugby fans chanting. I don't think I'll ever experience a moment like that again.
Mandela suddenly appeared in the captain's jersey, stunning the white crowd, standing by his team.
Nelson, Nelson, Nelson. We stood there and we didn't know what to say. The liberation struggle of our people was not about liberating blacks from bondage, but more so, it was about liberating white people from fear. And there it was, fear melting away. Nelson, Nelson.
That's Zinzanbroek.
New Zealand, the favorites, were expected to run away with the game.
On the inside to Brewer. This is Walter Little.
But in the dying minutes, with the game tied, South Africa made their move.
Stransky looks for the drop. Has he got it? Yes, it's over. That is it. The final whistled in. South Africa win this Rugby World Cup final.
The whole country went wild. He said later, it was the happiest day of his life.
That was a defining moment in the life of our country. It's not anything that you can contrive. Can't unbelievable that when we won, that people could be dancing in Soweto. It had the effect of just turning around, I think, our country. It said it is actually possible for us to become one nation. The icon of reconciliation and forgiveness, of holding together a country that everybody kept predicting, oh, it didn't happen at the elections, it didn't go up in flames in the elections, give them 6 months, and this country will be down the tubes. It's 4 years later. And I do believe that without him, it would not have been possible to hold together those disparate parts that were flying all over the place. And that is, I think, his greatest legacy.
Mandela had promised he would leave office after one term. Back in the hills of Transkei, he built a retirement home, an exact replica of the house he lived in at Victor Verster prison. The young man who ran away from the responsibilities of his birth was expected home.
He has a role to play.